Hi, everyone. Welcome to another HydroPoint Thought Leadership webinar, where the intent is to share practical tips that you can implement in your business, and or perhaps we might spark new interest for how you approach outdoor water conservation. I'm Andy Humphrey, Irrigation Technology Consultant for HydroPoint, and I'm going to be co-moderating with Ben Coffey here today, and our guest is Max Moreno. So I think just to get started, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And our topic for today is West Coast water budgets, how landscape water managers can turn water into money. So we're really going to be focusing on the water budget aspect of outdoor water conservation. Again, I'm Andy, joined by Ben, and Ben is the training manager for WeatherTrack and HydroPoint. And we've got Max Moreno joining us today, who is the VP of Water Conservation for Harvest Landscape Enterprises. In just a moment, Max, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, but I do know that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that starting at the beginning of this year, Harvest created a new division of the company and kind of separated it out into a new division called Elevate Water Management. And the new division offers conservation services that include site audits, water budgeting, and sub-consulting services that you can even offer to other contractors. Is that right, Max?
Yes, Andy, that's correct. So as of the beginning of this year, we went ahead and changed our division name into Elevate Water Management, which has actually taken off, which is a good thing. And the whole reason why we created Elevate Water Management is to help other contractors that necessarily can't or don't have the bandwidth to perform water management. And we see this as a benefit to the industry because we really want all the contractors to be aligned with water management and how to use the practices correctly. So if I can help other contractors be aligned with what the big major players in water management can do, it's a win-win for everybody. So this is one of the reasons why we decided to start Elevate Water Management.
Excellent. And how long have you been doing budgeting before you guys started this new division?
We've been doing, me personally, I've been doing it all my career, water budgeting. But within the company, we've been doing it for many years, even before I started with Harvest. It's an essential tool, not just for water management, but for any landscape company, especially in the West Coast here in Southern California. We do have a lot of water agencies that require us to water budget. Otherwise, our customers and a few of our partners can get penalized for it. So it's a way of life down here in Southern California. Even more after this drought that we were in, we don't see it as something that's going to go away in the future. If anything, it's going to be a way of life, and it's really important that we do water budgeting.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And Ben, how long have you worked with Max and the Harvest team?
I have been working with Max for a couple of years now. He's been a guest on my Smart Water Wednesday series, and he was on my Dropped when we turned our WeatherTrack knowledge into a game show. I was around at the very beginning of AquaMax and the Harvest Lab, so I'm a big fan of everything that you guys are doing, Max.
Thank you.
Excellent. So we're going to try to keep this as simple as possible. And there's really sort of four key areas that we're going to talk about. So I kind of want to just mention the outline so everybody watching today knows what we're going to talk about. So it's all about water budget. So we're going to kind of describe what is a water budget. Then we're going to talk about the importance of a water budget. Then we're going to show you and talk about how Max creates a water budget. And then we're going to look at the tools that WeatherTrack offers that Max uses to implement the water budget, monitor, report on it, communicate with clients, and then we'll finish up with a little Q&A. All right, so let's jump right into what is a water budget. And I wanted to start by, I guess, reminding everyone that yes, we're talking about a water budget, but the key word is budget. And what we are talking about isn't that different from any other budgets that you might have in your business, in your life, and that the sort of dictionary definition of a budget is a calculation plan. We're going to talk about that today, usually, but not always financial, which is part of this, for a defined period of time, often 1 year or 1 month, that we're also going to look at later on. And so why don't you, Max, kind of just talk to us about what you consider to be a water budget from the perspective of the water manager?
Yeah, that's a good question. And typically when we talk about water budgets, the meaning could be different from person to person. As a water manager working on the landscape side, it's a different meaning compared to the customer. Typically when I talk to the customer, they're more of dollars and cents. They look at it as a figure of a dollar amount. What I like to educate our customers is that the dollar amount is great, and we can forecast how much typically within a budget or a fiscal year they can spend on water budgeting. But I also look at the health of the landscape and the irrigation. On the contractor side, it's really important that we maintain a healthy looking landscape, and that doesn't always lead to dollars and cents. So to me, a water budget is giving the landscape the right amount of water that it needs so that it stays looking as healthy as possible. So for us, we take whatever the landscape needs and convert it into dollars and figures or cents into these kind of figures. Now, it's really important because we need to come up with a budget so that our customers understand how much they can forecast to spend every fiscal year. One of the hardest things when it comes to these water budgets is that customers always expect to spend the same amount of money year after year. But as you know, with CPI or inflation and just the availability of water, it keeps going up. So I can literally use the exact same water year after year, but the cost may go up, and that's because water rates keep going up. So that's one of the reasons why I like to educate the customers and say, don't use last year's numbers. If there's a way to improve the landscape and the irrigation, chances are maybe I can even reduce it from last year. But if nothing changes, expect for water rates to continue to go up and your water budget to go up. My job is to make sure that I stay within what the landscape needs.
Excellent. And appreciate those tips. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more into how Max comes up with that information. I wanted to also then share how WeatherTrack considers a water budget, or the budget manager. And Ben's going to share his screen with us in a few minutes. And I just thought, Ben, maybe if you had a second here, you could just kind of describe how WeatherTrack thinks of a water budget.
Yeah, certainly. And Max is better to speak to this than I am, but there are a variety of ways to establish what a customer should use on their landscape, right? We're calculating a landscape irrigation requirement or a fiscal budget or mandated from a local water authority. But what we have is a month-by-month allocation that says you have this much water that you are able to use. And likely there's fines and penalties that come with exceeding that amount. And so my dad was an economics teacher. He always talked about how there's two parts of a budget, right? There's the making of the budget, which is how you establish the numbers, and then the keeping of the budget, which is the real work of it, and tracking how you're progressing along the way and making sure that your goal is never exceeded, right? And you always stay inside those parameters. And so when we talk about the budgeting tools, we'll look at exactly how we make a budget and then how we keep a budget with the WeatherTrack tools.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I can't wait for you to share those tools with us here in just a moment. So the next thing that I think would be great to hear from you, Max, is, and you shared these pictures with us so you could kind of describe them, but really, like, why are we doing a budget? Like, what's the importance of a water budget?
So yeah, I'm glad you spoke about that. And these pictures I've shared throughout my years. I'm a water nerd, and not only that, I'm a technology nerd.
Woo!
When I first got my drone, I was like, how can I use this drone other than just for, videotaping? And I said, you know what? I'm going to use this for my water budgeting and smart controller purpose. So this was done back in, I believe, in 2018 or so. We had an HOA that was severely over on budget. The landscape just didn't look good. And all in all, this was more of how can I show the value of proper water budgeting. So in this instance, and by the way, this story has been published in a landscape management magazine, where it shows the proof is in the pudding. What I ended up doing here was demonstrating to the HOA the importance of smart controllers and water budgeting. It was very hard for us to maintain a water budget and provide the landscape what it needed. By implementing smart controllers and a water budget, I was able to turn areas that were suffering of water into just the right amount of water and being under budget. So part of it was that I showed the HOA that it actually saved on water, and it produced a better looking landscape. And it was only because we were applying the water correctly in all the zones that needed the water. So as you can tell in the picture on the left, we were actually providing more water to the planter areas that didn't need the water and stressing out the turf. And it was just a constant battle. Once we had a plan in place with the water budgeting aligned with the smart controllers, I mean, I was able to put the water where it needed to be and not so much in the areas that it didn't need. And this is where the technology of the drone came into the picture, and I was able to show this to the HOA. Afterwards, they were all on board with water management and smart controllers.
Well, I love that. Can you, just so we know exactly what we're looking at, can you tell us about the picture on the left and tell us about the picture on the right? And, was one of them, just describe the picture so we know what we're looking at.
Yeah, specifically, Max, the picture on the left, is that property damage due to overwatering? Is that what you said?
So the picture on the left, it's mainly areas where it was suffering from water. We weren't applying the water, and we were trying to figure out, well, we're over on budget and the turf area looks stressed, but the plant areas look a little more wet than they should have. And what I ended up doing here was installing a smart controller and putting in the correct amount of water where it needed to be. Now the picture on the right, it shows that the turf is nice and green. The plants are looking healthier. There are a few hot spots, but at that point, I actually told the HOA that I could no longer apply more water to get rid of those hot spots. That's more of a field issue. That's more of a DU, irrigation efficiency. And I basically said at that point, now I know where I need to fix the irrigation inefficiencies. But not only that, I was able to show the HOA that we were actually conserving water, and they were just amazed of how a well-planned water budget with smart controllers, it was a huge benefit. So those were the two pictures. I basically did a before and after. So you're looking at the left as before and the right as afterwards.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that it's greener. Let's just say it's greener, but you didn't use more water in order to make it greener.
We used less water, and it was because we were applying water in other locations that didn't need it, where in this location it did need it. And it's kind of like I shifted the water usage from the planter areas and other locations into the grass area. So not only were the plants actually thriving with less water, the turf was actually thriving because it needed that water. So it's basically shifting the water usage to where it needs it. And that's where the weather tracks, the hydroponics actually came into play. And it helped make believers of water management and smart controllers in this HOA.
That is awesome. So basically, let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly. There was, a finite amount of water, and you decided to move water from one area, reduce it in one area, move that water allocation to this other turf area, and increase the water usage there to kind of like reprioritize where the water was going on the site.
Correct.
And these pictures show that the landscape, the other landscape, not the turf, but the other gardens around, look like they're thriving. It looks super healthy.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's the importance of actually going through, putting the plan together, going zone by zone and documenting the plan area, the irrigation type, the inefficiencies, and coming up with the plan, putting it into the weather track controller, and then establishing a budget. And it's amazing to know that it actually, the landscape looked a lot healthier with less water. And that's where even myself, I shouldn't say I was surprised, but I was pleasantly surprised at the outcome, where I was like, I'm so glad I took pictures. I'm so glad I documented all this.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think you'll probably share more in just a minute. My first thought is that it's likely on a lot of commercial landscapes, there are some zones that really just don't even need much water anymore, in certain parts of the country, because now they're mature, they've got established root zones, yet they're likely still being watered as if it was a new construction planting, and that, the water needs to be reallocated, just like you've done on this site.
Correct.
Great. So that's an awesome lead into sort of how you go about creating the water budget. And I would love for you to explain it. And what Max explained to me, a few weeks ago on a prep call, was that he had 3 sort of methods for this: a good, better, best, based on the, needs of the site, the budgets the client could afford, et cetera. So why don't you tell us, Max, about how you go ahead and create your budgets?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 3 ways that we do water budgets. Typically, when we get put onto a new site, we have to analyze what the previous years look like. How were they using the water? And sometimes it could be that they were underwatering, but typically we find out that they're overwatering. So what we try to do is stay within the alignment of what was used the prior years. Now that's good, but it's not as good as you'd want to, because like I said, it's just a system of just maintaining what was already there. What we like to do is to make sure to use that as our tolerance level of like, okay, that's what we're going to go to, but we're going to try to identify as ways to improve the landscape, and then also reduce the amount of water. So the other option is to look at historical data as well. We look at the landscaped area, we look at the type of plant materials, and historically, how much water does this area need? From there, what we really like to do is perform an audit, which basically we capture the information of the plant type, the irrigation efficiencies, the type of irrigation, and then we combine that all with the historical data and the ET to basically document where the HOA could potentially, where it is and where it could potentially be at. Sometimes with these audits, what it really we look at is that there's 2 approaches. Number 1, do you have a lot of plants that consume a lot of water? Or 2, how good is your irrigation? And from there, we establish the best type of water budget that there could be. And we explain that to our customers. We say, hey, you should be here, and with our data, it says you actually should be here. And typically it kind of leads into a conversation where our customers ask, well, we've always dreamt of using X amount of water, which to them, it's always a dollar figure. So from there, we calculate the information and tell them we can get you there. If we change this type of landscape, maybe improve your irrigation efficiencies, dial it in with smart controllers. And this is where I'm a big believer. And I show those images that we looked at prior, where we come up with the best type of water budget that could be. So that's kind of the goal and the plan that we put together for our customers, so that they can really spend whatever X amount of dollars that they budget for water. And that's where the Elevate Water Management comes into play. That's our bread and butter, where we talk to customers and now other contractors how to put these game plans together for their customers as well.
And for someone that doesn't maybe know that much about what an audit is, and there's lots of different types of audits, how can you tell us about what you do when you audit, and maybe how long it takes, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, typically, depending on the size of the property or location, we really have to go zone by zone, and it's important to understand plant material. Some of the guys that I've taught to do the audits, we all use smartphones now. And there's a different types of apps. There's actually Google Photos where you can actually take a picture of the plant. It'll tell you the species. And not only that, there's information now with WUCLs where you can actually see if those plants are high water use or low water use. One of the things that I'm trying to teach people is to always use the same type of plant material in a zone, meaning don't mix high water use plants with medium water use plants. And I explain to contractors, this is part of the educational piece that I provide, is that I tell them when you mix plant materials with high water use and moderate water use, you're actually watering the whole zone as high water use, because the minute you water to the moderate, your high water use plants are going to start to suffer. So it's an educational piece, not only for other contractors, but our clients as well. When I start to talk about the plan of budgeting, I said, you know what, if you get rid of these type of plants or align them with more of a moderate water use or even a low water use, we can get that plan down. And then when it comes to the irrigation efficiencies, you know, not using mixed irrigation or using more of a high efficiency type of irrigation also will help the water budget to reduce it. And not only that, I mean, all in all, we're conserving water and providing a healthier looking landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And Max, included in those audits, to what level do you assess that irrigation system? Do we take it to the level of we're doing the catch cup test? What kind of assessment of the irrigation system are you doing? Is it something that you standardize, or is it different every time?
So we have standardized it within Elevate and Harvest, and one of the things that I'm doing is standardizing it across the industry. That's where I love to sit down with other landscapers and basically get us all aligned to a system of doing it. And yes, if we can do a catch can test, that's great. And I have 3 different type of catchment devices that I use. I got the Cal Poly, I got the Utah, and I got the Texas. So I
totally thought you were going to say I have a tuna fish can, because that's what
I've used the Tupperware too. So
okay.
I've actually done all of that. I've actually had to use the Tupperware when I've done drip irrigation audits. So typically, if we can do catchment, if we can use catchment devices to do an audit to determine the irrigation efficiencies, that would be best. But if you can't, it's more of a kind of gauging it with your eye and determining how efficient it is. And that's typically where the more people you can involve in collecting that data, you know, using resources either from another contractor if they're friends, say like, yeah, you know what, I would gauge it at this much. All in all, it helps everybody. So really, there's different methods. I always try to gauge it if I can't do the catch can test, but typically, you know, you want to do at least one catch can test to determine what the efficiency is, and then kind of gauge it with your eye on all the different zones.
And approximately how long does it take to do the audit?
I mean, typically I like to spend a full day just to go through a whole controller. It could be 2 controllers per day. It all really depends on the property, the zones. It could be a lot of factors. But what I like to tell people is to take your time. And we always use that analogy, garbage in, garbage out. Take your time, get the information correctly, because in the long run, remember, you're putting a plan and a water budget together that you want it to be successful. So you don't want to collect the wrong information or be in a hurry to collect it. You want to really take your time and do this right.
Yeah. And we had a question came in. I'm going to ask you now because it's right on this topic. There's some other questions that I'll save to the end, and feel free to ask a question if you have something that you want answered. So as it relates to doing these, the question is, do you get paid up front to do the audit, or are you just doing it hoping that you take over the maintenance?
Typically, when we do audits, we don't really get paid up front. We really provide a proposal. If we get a signed proposal, we'll get paid for that audit. Sometimes when it comes to consulting work, we will get hired afterwards as long-term, just to help the HOA to make sure that there's a third party involved to manage the water. As Elevate Water Management, the whole reason why we created Elevate is because we really want to be unbiased. We're not looking at the maintenance, we're just looking at the right approach, and it's to the point where I'm actually helping contractors stay within the property. And that's the whole educational piece of why it's important that we elevate the industry and we get everybody aligned.
Nice. Yeah. Let's raise the bar.
Elevate.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. If anybody has any questions, we can jump back at the end during the Q&A and ask Max. Let's move on to looking at the kind of what we might call the real world tools, the actual software tools that, Ben trains on and Max uses, starting with the WeatherTrack Budget Monitor. So I will stop sharing, and Ben, you can share your screen.
I can take it from there.
And this is a live demo. This is not a canned slide. So we are literally in the WeatherTrack software here. So take it away, Ben.
All right. And you're seeing my screen, Andy?
Yes.
Okay. So again, we are at WeatherTrack Central. So when you log in, you land on the home page, and we will be going to the Budget Monitor tab. This is where all of our budgeting tools exist. And I really want to highlight the budget details. This is where kind of that key conversation about making a budget and keeping a budget come into play. So the first thing we want to talk about is making that budget. So down here, you can see with WeatherTrack, you can create as many as 3 different budgets that we can use. If I click here on the manage budgets, I can define those budgets. Since I'm in Denver, I use Denver water tiers as my budget tool, and my first year of usage as my baseline. But again, that can be different. You can set up a water budget however you like. But then once you define that budget, you'll go through and edit each month individually, right? So it is a month by month budget that we're looking at.
So can I ask you a quick question? As Max, he sort of stated there's those 3 steps. So step number 1 is you could just take last year's monthly water bill and type it in here. Is that right?
Absolutely. Right, we could just that's what I call baseline usage, right?
Okay.
As before the project started, what were we doing? And then if you had calculated your own budget based on a landscape irrigation requirement, you could do it here. If you had one coming from your water authority, you could do it here, right? And you could manage against each or any of those.
Awesome.
And this is where it's great, where I personally use it, is I use historical, what did we use the prior year? Because that's typically the budget that the HOA uses. And then there's water agencies. So water agencies will establish you need to be within this budget. And then we use what we documented based off of our audit as our third. So we have a good, better, best.
Awesome. And are those like goals? Like goal number 1, let's hit budget 1. Goal number 2, let's see if we can improve it to the second. And goal number 3, let's see if we can hit this stretch goal of this third budget.
Correct.
Excellent.
Okay, so that is setting those goals, right? Outside of calculating, which is on the water manager, we just put them into the system here so that in turn we can measure against them. And that's where we come up to this graph. This is a real-time display that pipes in some real-time information, or you can add it in yourself. So we call them metrics. It's just 2 lines on the graph, right? 2 different metrics that we're comparing. What I've got set here is the historical usage in orange, and then my 2022 usage in blue. So this is coming straight from my flow sensor, and I can come in and I can see how many gallons I've measured on that site, and then compare it to what usage I've outlined with my budget. So, and this is what I did all of last year. And then you can see it was hotter in the spring. I had to turn my system on early. And then this year, completely different, to Max's point. If you live in Denver, you know that this year, 2023, my measured usage kind of looks like this. Down here, we've got the orange measured usage. I have had so much rain that I haven't turned on my irrigation system except for just this month. So that historical number, again, not always reliable because there's so many variables, changes in landscape, changes in weather, changes in price. These are all things that need to be considered when managing these budgets.
And what this shows right here is year to date, you're under by 71 CCF. Is that correct?
Yeah, 71, 99% over last year, right? If I went back to my baseline or my historical usage, you can see it's 99% down, 69 CCF saved.
Awesome. Is there anything else, Max, you want to add to this?
I can definitely attest to that because in Southern California, we got a lot of rain. So this year we've started off really great with a lot of our clients. We're definitely gonna be way under the budget, I think, for the rest of the year, just looking at it, because the amount of rain that we had with the hydropoint controllers just being off throughout this rain. My budget almost looks like Ben's right now, so it looks like it's gonna be it's right under there. I think at one of my sites I was like under 80%, so it's really cool.
Wow, this is 2023, the year of the hero.
The year it all pays off.
Exactly. I was gonna say that this year it's speeding up that ROI pretty quick.
Absolutely.
Wow, fantastic. So, a user can come in here and look at all this and run this kind of charts. So the next step would be, how do these, how does this data get generated and then sort of like reported to the client?
Absolutely. So this is what I think of as where Max would work, right? This is real time. So he can log in at any time and get up to the minute information. Here's my budget. Here's my measured usage as of right now, right? That's not exactly what he would be reporting out to his customer. So that we would look for on the reports page, right? WeatherTrack has a library of reports that can be pulled. And so if I go to the reports tab and use the drop-down menu, see down here, we have a whole section called Budget Manager Reports. And each one of these reports says something different. So like the account report will show Max all of the budgets inside of a particular account. So he can at a glance see how one customer is doing across many sites. But what I want to show you is this site report. So a single site budget. And I'd come in here, I'd select the type of report that I want. And then I'd come in and I would define what the time period is. I can either select one of these canned time periods or create custom dates. We'll just say for last year, because that's kind of what we were looking at before. And then we would select the controller and say, I want this on my yard. I want to compare the historical usage to the measured usage. And I get my water bills in K gallons, not in CCF. So
and hold right there for a second. So okay. I'm seeing dollars as a drop down. That's a really interesting metric.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where you can change that conversation, because the HOA board that Max is dealing with doesn't talk in cubic feet or in kgals, right? It's all about the dollars. So we can absolutely go in and say, this is how much we're paying for a unit, and I'll show you how that pays off in the report. So I'm going to keep it at 4 because I don't know off the top of my head what that unit cost is. But we can immediately render that in an Excel spreadsheet, PDF, or I can actually subscribe to that report, which means I can set it up to automatically generate and come to my inbox at the cadence of my choosing, right? So I can get this report just automatically generated in my inbox once a week.
Okay. And Max, which speaking on behalf of like your clients, what do you send to them?
I typically like to send this budget site report because it's kind of all in one, and it gives a nice little graph. Sometimes I have to do per controller. Typically with some clients, they want to see a per meter. But the budget site report is something that's really easy for the customers to digest. It's to the point, it's nice and clean. This is the one that I like to use. And the importance of this versus, like, let's say a home brewed report that says like either A or B landscaper is that it's kind of like you're really telling the customer like, hey, this is your investment. This is your investment of the smart controllers giving you this report. This isn't coming from us, the landscaper or water manager. This is from a third party or the system that you invested in.
And do you set them up on the subscribe so it comes automatically, or do you send it to them manually?
So typically I kind of subscribe to myself just because I like to look at it before I send it. I like to send it myself because I like to put little notes that way. If something comes up or there's an anomaly with all the rain, I'd say, hey, you know what, we're really under this year, but obviously, it's because of the rain. Please check out the report. Here you go.
Okay.
I like that too. You want to know what you're giving them before you give it to them. That's
Right.
fine. I definitely recommend, if you're in Max's position, look at it before you forward it on.
Awesome. Well, let's take a look, Ben. Show us what the report looks
So
like.
once you have generated it, it will come up looking like this. And this is, let me blow this up, see if you can see it. This is my controller here at my house. We went in, it shows us where we're in and out of budget, and we've got all of those lines. And then as we go, notice this is just a first page of an 8-page report. And on a commercial site, the information is more robust for sure. But this is where that conversation about price pays off, right? What Max was saying before is I decreased the amount on my shrubs and increased the amount on my turf. And now I can see that based on the way my controller is programmed, we estimate the usage on turf to be 36 of 48 K-gallons that I used. And the direct cost of that for last year is $143. So we can very easily go in and translate kind of what we talk about in terms of water budgets into the more fiscal conversation that Max's customers are looking for.
Excellent. Excellent. I think we're going to bleed this into our last section of client communication, because this really is part of the client communication, process. Because in my mind here, just I'm thinking back to the slide you showed before about, maybe this year being, a hero year where Max's company is looking great because there's been rain. So, they probably want to know, why am I using less or more water?
Absolutely. And that's where an expert like Aqua Max would come into play and define for them all of the nuance that goes into these water budgets and why the deliverables are so great this year.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I like to tell contractors as part of the educational piece. I usually tell people that want to implement some kind of water management program within their company. I told them the first thing you need to do if you're going to do water management is, number one, you need to make sure that you're using the best irrigation practices. But number two, you have to create measurables because you can't manage what you can't measure, and that's the number one thing that customer or other contractors pick up on. They're like, I never thought about that. I'm like, absolutely. How can you say you're saving water if you're not measuring it? So it's one of those things that I basically practice what I preach.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, did you want to see anything else before I hand it back?
If there's anything else in the budget report that would be useful, or if there's anything else, Max, that you like to share with your clients or pieces of it.
This budget report that I've been pulling from WeatherTrack has been completely awesome. There's an HOA in Huntington Beach, California, where we just got them on the hydro points. We're putting in the OptiFlows, we're putting in flow sensors, master valves, and we're talking about a very old community where the water was actually tied into all the buildings. So now that we're actually putting in these sub-meters, the HOA is very excited to know how much water is actually being used within the landscape. So that's where these reports actually come into play. And it actually helps them to determine, like, hey, actually, we're not using as much water as we thought we did in our landscaping. So you can actually see where they're actually starting to gauge it with their water bills to determine how much water is being used within the complex and what's being used in the landscape. So it's been super key. We started out with a few controllers in this HOA, and now the HOA says, like, we want to do all the controllers in the community. So
wow. So we, Ben just showed us, we got this report. You can subscribe to it. It can automate, or you can send it directly. And can we talk a little bit about that communication process? In other words, do your clients reply back to you? Do you set up weekly meetings, monthly meetings? Do you go to their office? How do you like to communicate with your clients?
It's a little of both. Obviously, after COVID, a lot of it has been through emails or Zoom meetings like this. We are starting to see where some clients prefer us to go inside and hand these reports in. Either way, we provide both. But the visuals of this report is what's key. You know, that's one of the things that we like to do as well with taking pictures. Sometimes when we see in areas that's getting a little bit stressed, hey, we're within water budget. As you can tell, here are the pictures. It's starting to show a little bit stressed. Some of the things that the clients tell us based off of the report, they're like, okay, we still want to stay within the water budget. How can we get these areas to not look stressed and stay within the water budget? And that's where we basically tell them like, hey, number one thing we need to do is keep working on the efficiency of your irrigation. This is where I tie in the water savings and I say, hey, we've saved you X amount of money controlling the water budget. How about you invest a little bit of that savings back into the irrigation and improve the irrigation? So it's kind of a win-win in the long run if you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the conversations and communication I usually have with our clients.
Great, great. We have one, we're about to do Q&A, but we had one question come in about, who are you actually communicating with? Like what kind of, I guess, maybe stakeholder, but the question is, who do you work with on these projects?
So typically I work directly with the property manager, sometimes with boards of HOAs. We always involve the account managers within the companies that we work for, not just for Harvest. Obviously now we're working with other contractors as kind of that consultant middleman. And sometimes we have to involve some of the water agencies just because they're tied to these HOAs, especially if the water agency says like, hey, we noticed this HOA was using X amount of water a year or two ago. And now ever since you guys came in, we've noticed there's a drop in water. What's going on? Is everything okay? It's like, no, it's fine. We're just actually using it correctly. We've got a third party involved, so it's actually been pretty good.
Awesome. And then we have a question about maybe it's relevant to the water agency. How do tiered rates play into this?
So tiered rates is really important. Actually, not too long ago in December of last year, there was a new HOA that actually hired just our services as water management to control the water usage. Now, what's interesting about this is that they only have one smart controller because they're kind of teeter-tottering whether to go full on. So I said, that's fine. We'll go ahead and manage your non-smart controllers. And I had to put a budget plan together. And on that budget plan, it actually showed that they're going to be in tier 2 and tier 3. And they said, well, we're hiring you to do the water management. Why are you forecasting us to be in tier 3? And I said, because your water agency says that you should have all your landscape be a moderate water use plants. You have about 70% turf. If I want to maintain your turf looking good, I have to water into tier 3. So I really like to set the expectations and say like, look, I think your landscape appearance is what's most important to everybody at this point. Either we reduce the amount of high water use plants, or we figure out a way to improve your irrigation efficiency. So sometimes just setting that realistic expectation of being in these tiers is what's going to set myself up to be successful. And I always try to go for a goal of being under the budget, but if I see like a little bit of stress, I'm going to explain it to them like, hey, you know what, this is where it's that next level and I'm proving the point. We're going to have to be into tier 3 just so that everything looks good. But now I'm showing you the plan of going forward of either introducing smart controllers, reducing the amount of high water use plants, and possibly upgrading the efficiency of your irrigation system.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. There's a similar question here about, is there a reasonable offset from the budget that is normal? I guess maybe that means, do you tell your clients you might be 10% over, 10% under? Is there a reasonable variance?
Yes and no. Just because a lot of these budgets that are set by the water agencies are dynamic. We set up our own budget of what we think it will be. So sometimes we will have to offset depending on the weather pattern. So it is a little bit dynamic. And that's why I always like to do the good, better, best budget. Just so that we can stay within those ranges. But there could be situations where it's going to be a little bit offset just because of the environmental conditions, or sometimes what happens too is that the landscaper says, hey, we're going to overseed, or we're going to install these new plants. Okay, they're going to install new plants. Plants need an establishment period. Guess what? That budget that was set for that month is no longer valid. It's now over here.
Yeah. Okay. Next question is, what % of your customers use budget services?
Right now we're in an interesting position because it's almost where customers are really requesting budgets. Before it was more of 50% of our customers were really requiring it. After the drought of last year, everyone's like, okay, we need a budget. Something's going on. We don't know how much water we're going to have. The water rates are going up. So it quickly changed from like 50 to almost 100%. There's a few customers that living in Southern California. There's some anomalies where the water is actually being used by some lakes and parks where it's really hard to control the water budget unless we have some kind of sub meter. So that's why I like to say up to 100%, not there yet. You know, there are these situations where it's just hard to establish some kind of water budget if that water is being diversified somewhere else.
Yeah, and then we just had a question on that. How many sites do you have to add additional meters to?
It's I would have to say it's not that many. I'd have to say about 30 to 35%. There's some, but typically down here where we're at, a lot of the landscaping has its own dedicated meter. But there are these, I could say these older areas that were, I think, pre-19, I believe it was 1980 or so, where everything was just combined with buildings. Those are the areas where we have to put in additional sub meters just to manage the water in those areas.
Okay. Good. Well, before we wrap up, I just, give you the floor here too, Ben. If there's anything from the training perspective, you work with a lot of clients all over the country. If there's anything else that you want to add to the conversation here before we wrap up.
I think Max did a great job. I think nowhere do I see this being more prevalent than in Southern California, but I do believe that this type of restriction makes the most sense for managing water. Where Denver Water gives me 3 days a week, I can really use whatever I want in those 3 days a week. So having these measured budgets and holding people accountable to them, I see really as the plan going forward, or the way that it makes the most sense. So even though it might not be touching your neighborhood yet, it is something that is proving out to be very valuable in the places where it lives. Yeah,
can totally see that. The last slide I've got up here, if you'd like to reach out to HydroPoint, you can contact the company at info@hydropoint.com. If you'd like to reach out to Max or Harvest, the email address is harvestmarketing@hlei.us. And I got one final question for you, Max. How important are the WeatherTrack tools to your business and what you do?
Selfishly, if I didn't have the WeatherTrack, my life would be a lot harder. I'm not gonna lie to you. We do have some HOAs where they don't have, like I said, we don't have the smart controllers, and usually I like to put a case study together. And actually, it's kind of like that whole Costco, right? I take my kids to Costco like every other weekend, and they go for the samples, right? They want to taste that sample. So typically what I like to tell the customers is like, hey, you know what, let's Harvest. We're gonna invest in your community like you're investing in us. Let's put in one smart controller so you can actually see what the benefits are. And typically after that, that's where we get the results. We show them the pictures, we show them the water savings, we explain to them that how much of a tool and a benefit it is for us and them, because it is an investment. So it 99% of the time that the customers actually it put in the right hands, they see the benefit of it, and it's made my life a lot easier. I tell you that.
Awesome.
I don't see it going away. It's the future.
That's great. Well, Ben, thank you so much for joining me today. Max, thank you for sharing these valuable insights from your business. It's always awesome to hear from actual water managers that are sort of like, we might say creating the future of our industry and raising that bar and elevating what we're doing. So thank you so much for sharing. And we appreciate everybody joining us today, and we'll see you on the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.